Thank you for sharing. I mean, he really taught you from his own example. And it's just so powerful the way that he could just walk on set and without even knowing it or meaning to just have such a deep impact on you.
Yes, yes. And I mean, I'm telling you, like, I see it in my mind's eye right now, Jenny. And it changed me in that moment, changed me. I was like, there's nothing wrong with me. There's nothing wrong with me. If I need to look at my lines before I act, that's what I have to do. As long as what's on the other side is something that honors the story that you're trying to tell, that's all that matters. How you get there is your business. Michael wasn't looking around like, oh, what are y'all thinking about me? He didn't care. He's just trying to be as brilliant as he knew how to be, which is easy for him, you think, right? You think, oh, it just comes natural to him, you know? But no. First, what you saw in his way of working were the words he had to say.
Can you describe more after that moment what that changed you? How you felt and how that affected how you were on set for the rest of the shoot?
I got out of that silliness. You know what I mean? I got out of that silliness. I stopped questioning myself. I mean, this man freed me. He freed me. He didn't just heal me of my, insecurity about how I worked. He freed me from caring about how I thought other people thought I worked. You know, girl, talk about baggage. The baggage that we carry around with us.
Yes.
That is just so unnecessary to do. And I was carrying all this weight with me. And he was just like, put that down. You don't need that. You don't need all that. Bag lady, put that down. You know what I mean? Just do your
Cue
work.
Erykah Badu.
Cue Erykah. You gonna hurt your bag carrying all them bags like that. And that's what I was doing. And he was like, girl, he didn't even say these things to me.
No.
He did it by just being himself. And I mean, this is going to bring me back to my grandmother. I grew up with my grandmother. Her name was Mrs. Murtis Taylor. She raised me in Southwest Mississippi in a town called Macomb. And so my grandmother was this woman who was the wife of a man who was a pastor, and he pastored 4 different churches. Because during that time, a lot of people don't have cars, a lot of people didn't have access. You couldn't just get in a car and go to church. So a lot of times these ministers, they would pastor several different churches, and people would go to church once a month when the pastor could be there. Right? So my grandfather was one of those pastors that pastored 4 different churches. So when my grandfather passed away, my grandmother became this first lady. She was the first lady of all these churches, but she was the first lady of a community, essentially. So when I went to live with her, part of her, duty, as she understood it in the world, was to take care of the sick and shut in. Like, that's a term that we use in church all the time, sick and shut in. And so she would go, and my childhood was spent taking care of sick people and taking plates to people who were hungry and sitting with people who were older and couldn't get out. And, that's what my grandmother did. That's who she was. And in so many ways, I feel that I'm a straight line from that. That's what I understand of how you are supposed to be as a human being. It's not just cultural for me. Of course it is. It's cultural. It's my heritage, of course. But I know that as my understanding of what humanity is.
How did that foundation lead you to creative work? Like, was your grandmother interested in that?
My grandmother was not liberal with her emotions, right? So I remember I was 9 or 10 at the time, and I'd say, Grandmother, what would you change about yourself if you could change anything about yourself? And I remember my grandmother saying to me, well, I wish I could talk more. I wish I could talk more. And so I thought about it. You think about these things, of course, years later, like you contextualize how deep that is. You don't see it in the moment, but later on, you're like, right? When I think about her, people were always coming to her and talking to her. You know, they would come on Sunday evenings and just sit on our porch and in our living room and just talk to my grandmother. You know what I mean? But she wasn't necessarily a talker. My grandmother was a doer. She was a doer. I was not trying to be an actor. I didn't grow up imagining that I would be an actor. I had no interest in being an actor. I knew I wanted to be something creative, but it wasn't acting, right? So our little outlet for our creativity was church. And there was this day that it was torrential rainfall. It was probably a tornado. I don't know what kind of catastrophe it was going on at the time, but nobody should have been out on the streets at all, on the roads. Nobody. And they wanted me to say a poem. Like, these kids were always saying poems in church. So I was assigned to do a poem in like this program on Sunday night. And I was begging my grandmother, please, grandmama, take me. Now, my grandmother had me in church 5 days out of the 7 days. So for me to have to ask her to take me to church tells you how bad the weather was.
Yeah.
So she was like, Aunjanue, it's too bad. I can't, blah, blah, blah. And I just kept begging her and kept begging her, kept begging her. She relented. We got in the car. We didn't have the best car in the world at all. We got to maybe, I don't know, 100, 200 yards from my house, and the car got stuck in the mud. And my grandmother got out of the car and pushed the car out of the ditch. I don't know how old my grandmother was. She probably was 70-ish. And she pushed that car out of a ditch so that I could go to church and say that poem.
How did she do that?
You tell me how she did it. She did it. She did it. I watched her get out of the car and push it.
I'm assuming an old ass heavy car.
You know, it was old, ugly. You know, I didn't mean to say ugly, but it was ugly. It was all of that.
How did you think she was able to push that car at that moment?
I didn't think anything. I just wanted to say my poem, girl. You know what I mean? I was a stupid kid. It's only years and years later, I'm somewhere probably, who knows where I am. And it just hits me what she did.
Yeah.
And so what I'm saying is, whatever I had in me that was saying, you want to be a creative human being, my grandmother and I weren't having any sort of conversation like that, is what I'm saying. But that act, that superpower act that she did, was her pushing me into me having this conversation with you right now, essentially.
Oh.
And that's what Michael did to me. Like, we never had these kinds of conversations, but this man changed my creative life. That woman, without saying a word to me, ordered my feet into wherever I still don't know where I'm going, but she ordered my feet into what it was, into what it is now. You know, and I just think that's so important. It's like, we talk so much shit, Jenny. We talk so much shit. You know what I mean? But the real measure of who we are is in what we do.
Yeah. They supported you and moved you in the direction you needed to go through their action.
Through their actions.
It's true. It's not like necessarily you said, Grandmama, this poem that I perform shall set me in the direction of becoming a grand actor.
Right.
But in that moment, she supported you.
Yeah.
I love this parallel that you're drawing between your experience with Michael and what your grandmother raised you to understand to be the way to exist, which is, you use this term, to be of service.
Yeah.
And you also use that same term when you described how Michael approached his acting and his work.
Yeah.
That he was just trying to be of service to the word and to the story. And so I can see the straight line between your grandma and Michael.
Yes, definitely. What I have in common with my grandmother is not being a talker. You know, there are people who probably would disagree, but I'm not a talker at all. You know, I'm very much an introvert. And I've been in situations with people in my life where they need me to say something, and I say very little because I want to be judged by my actions. We have this song from growing up in church, and it says, "May the work that I've done speak for me." And I just want that to be the guiding principle for my life, because I feel like that was the guiding principle for my grandmother's life. May the work I've done speak for me, because she wasn't a speaker. That's not who she was. She was a doer.
Yeah.
People have stories about what she did, not about what she said, about what she
Yeah.
did. My grandmother never said to me, girl, you're going to be great one day. She never said that to me, ever, ever. Michael and I never had one conversation, not one conversation along those lines, not one. But he changed my life, changed my life.
Our actions, even passive ones, have the power to impact others in ways we may never realize.